Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here with Carleton University's Philippe Lagassé. He is one of the biggest experts in the country on military procurement, and with the defense industrial strategy now kind of dominating the government's agenda this last week. I had some questions. I wanted to start off by bringing us back about 2 years ago when we were talking about we can't even supply enough ammunition for ourselves, let alone sending it to Ukraine and so on. And the defense industrial uh, people were going on shows and saying, well, we'd like to increase our production lines, but we have no certainty from government. So does this strategy actually provide some kind of certainty or ground map or anything for that ramp up to actually realistically happen?
Uh, it kind of half does,
Okay.
right? So it's interesting. There's a lot of money
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of intention.
Yeah.
It's in that middle zone between, okay, now we need actual projects and programs, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where it's a little uncertain for industry. I think part of the challenge here has always been government saying, okay, go on a war footing, invest, ramp up, and industry understandably saying, okay, but what are you buying?
Yeah.
Like what are you actually buying? Like, is there an order? Is there a capability you need? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
So there's been some low hanging fruit that they've been able to do. So Challenger replacement, submarines, and a couple of existing programs that are underway.
Mm-hmm.
But what's missing here, and some of us have been kind of harking on this for a while, but typically I would say you would put a new defense policy out first in an ideal world, kind of saying what you want the Canadian Armed Forces to do,
Yeah.
like number one.
Well, that and a foreign policy as well, which
Yeah.
would you would think would go hand in hand with the defense policy.
Yeah. So you'd want to have that piece first. Like, what do we actually expect the military to do? And then you have, or you could even do it together, but at the very least, like you want to have that kind of mission and intent piece there so
Yeah,
that industry then understands, okay, what is it that you're actually expecting me to accomplish, or what needs am I filling here before I invest?
yeah,
So that's the piece that's missing is just that interregnum really between, okay, we're massively increasing the budget. We're telling you we're going to buy Canadian, but we're not telling you what we're going to buy yet.
yeah. Okay. And what kind of a process does that look like? Other than just a press conference saying we're gonna build, partner, buy.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the challenge is the government says it itself. Okay, so it's going to build, partner, buy, but what are you going to build? What are you going to partner on? And what are you going to buy?
Yeah,
So you kind of need to have this other piece of saying, okay, here's a capability that we require. I mean, there's one, a airborne early warning control is an example. I mean, that's out there. We know it's there. That's a program that's underway. There's a couple of other ones like snowmobiles for the Arctic and some other things like that. But
yeah,
when it comes to some of these larger, okay, what should Canadian industry invest in? Obviously, a drone capability. I mean, there's things floating around in the ether.
yeah,
But right now, we're still kind of operating with projects and initiatives that were announced in 2017, 2024 in those defense policy statements. And those are just kind of moving their way through the pipeline. And the Canadian Armed Forces, I'm sure, has a kind of list of things that it would like. What concerns me is, does it align with the government's understanding of how the world has changed? And that's what we're missing. So
yeah,
I'm not saying it has to be kind of a full 100% fulsome kind of year, 18-month long process to develop this policy. But you would like to have the government come out and say, okay, here's what we think is going to be important for the Canadian Armed Forces to do in the future. And that's kind of where we're in a bit of a holding pattern, I'd say.
okay. Um, there's some other stuff in terms around we want to start exporting more. But you'd made some comments that I read this last week about, it's like who do we expect we're going to export to, and what are our values going to be around there? And you kind of listed France as an example. Let's delve into that a little more.
Sure. So when you look at the countries that have really managed to maintain a pretty vibrant defense industrial base, among our NATO allies in particular, and some of
Hmm.
our Asia Pacific allies, you need to, in many cases, have a very substantial export market as part of your strategy, particularly if you're on the smaller end, right? So you can have countries like Japan that don't sell, but invest a lot. But for the most part, when you're looking at countries kind of our size or slightly larger that want to develop their industrial base over the decades, they export.
Yeah,
And the challenge is as follows. The United States has made it clear that it's going to be investing more in its own industrial base. Europe has made it clear that it's going to be investing more in its industrial base. So the expectation that we're going to create a lot of buyers amongst our allies has to be tempered a bit. And the reason I point to the French case is simply the French are very explicit about this. They will say, look, I mean, we can't have an autarkic French defense industry without exports.
yeah,
That's just so when we develop a capability with industry through the DGA, the Direction Générale des Armements, they're already thinking of exports when they're developing the capability with industry. So they're thinking about obviously the needs for France, but they're also thinking about where do you sell it. And I had a bit of a flippant remark in the Star about, well, there's no morality here.
yeah,
The better way to phrase it is France puts its interests first, right?
yeah,
So it says, okay, our main interest is the defense of France and ensuring our independence and autonomy from the United States in particular.
hmm,
And so we're going to put that value ahead. And a number of French critics internally will say, look, I mean, they're very rules driven when it comes to the EU, but they're pretty flexible on stuff, right? So they will sell to, Egypt or a lot of sub-Saharan authoritarian regimes that they have close relationships with or whatever. So
yeah,
they're very focused on making sure that they can sustain their industry. Then you have kind of countries like Sweden that are more values based, but still, pretty out there, right, on the
yeah,
export market. And so the question I have is simply when looking at the strategy, it's very silent on that, right? It's very coy
yeah.
about doubling exports, and that's or increasing by 50%, I should say. So
Mhm.
that's you want to have some idea where how that's going to happen, and I think the government isn't being fully honest either with itself or with Canadians about whether or not that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I seem to recall them making a vague, hand wavy statement about we have a rigorous export control system, but I mean, we've had the controversy over LAVs to Saudi Arabia. We've had controversies brewing around the fact that we make F-35 parts, which go into planes, which go to Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and they're considering that a loophole in the export control process when it's for the entire supply chain. So I guess it's a question of yeah, how much are we kidding ourselves on this, and how much are can we expect to increase our exports if we're going to be extremely choosy about where these exports wind up?
Right. I mean, your point is correct. We have a robust export control regime. Yeah, right. And that's kind of the problem, right? That's the issue, right?
Yeah,
Is, we are choosy. And we've made that kind of a core piece of what we do. And we've been very good at saying, well, the United States is a trusted ally and it's, the leader of the democratic world over the decades. So no problem selling to them.
yeah,
Right. That's where we've done most of our business. Where it's going to get harder is, as we've seen, when we have kind of strayed out of that box that we've created for ourselves in selling laughs to Saudi Arabia or weaponry ending up in Yemen or whatever it is,
yeah,
or even vehicles ending up in the U.S. or being used by ICE for various things,
yeah.
then we get uncomfortable. The challenge I have with that is, again, are we being honest with ourselves around what it takes to sustain a major defense industrial base? There's a limit to how much Canada can buy. Is
Yeah.
kind of my underlying concern here.
Yeah, well, and I guess yeah, questions about how much we can sell as well. If
Yeah.
if And I guess I wonder if there's enough coordination among allies in terms of, I guess, distributing specializations, I guess, or like kind of coming up with an agreement like we'll develop this capability, you develop this capability, country three develop this capability, and we all kind of like swap around. Like, is that feasible, or how, is that something that's, I guess, a bit of a wishful thinking?
I mean, it's feasible, right? But just look at European naval capacity as an example. Like they have way too many yards for their needs, right?
Right.
And is anybody kind of going to them and saying, okay, maybe somebody should start shutting some yards? That's not going to go over well,
Yeah.
right? Which country gets to dominate, or which countries get to dominate the aerospace sector? There's things like that where you can have some complementarity, no question of that.
Hmm.
But it's hard. It is really hard,
Yeah.
which is why you end up with a lot of duplication in EU NATO states, and which is why what that's basically what we've done as a country, right? Is saying we're not going to try and compete with everybody on all these major capabilities. We're just going to plug into the easiest market, which
Which
is the
has
one
been the
south of the border,
U.S.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like an optimal strategy in that context because you're not trying to compete with others. I mean, the contrary example is the National Shipbuilding Program, where we've, built something up that's very self-sufficient and whatnot, but you speak to any critic and they're going to just rail about the price of that, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you just buy somewhere else or whatever it is? And this whole strategy is kind of saying, if I were to put it in simple terms, like doing a national shipbuilding strategy for the entirety of the Canadian Armed Forces in a way.
Yeah.
And you should expect a 30% premium in many cases, like you do with the ships, but that's the price of sovereignty.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, that is a way to frame it that you don't always get from the people who complain about the price tag.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, it's people are very inconsistent on this point. Well, some are more consistent than others. Right. So you'll
Yeah.
have Richard Shamuka, for example, will come out and he's a consistent guy. He's
Yeah.
saying, look, I mean, at least he'll disagree with the strategy, but he'll tell you like our future is with the U.S. and we should deepen that relationship and and then buy the best capability that you can, often from the U.S. And like why are we diluting ourselves? But then you'll have others who kind of want to have it both ways. I mean, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
Andrew Point here, where we don't want to buy from the U.S., so we'll put that limitation on, but then we're going to buy from other people and still get the best capability, but also not our adversaries. And so, like, you're putting in place a bunch of limitations on
Yeah.
what you're going to buy, right? But you still want it to be free markets. Well, which one is it? I mean, if
Yeah.
you're already saying that you can't depend on the U.S., then why would you become dependent on somebody else? And you look to Europe and you go, well, it's not exactly a bastion of political stability at the moment,
No.
right? Like,
No.
okay, so I'm going to go all in on partnerships, with countries who might elect very far right governments, and then I'm back in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm going, oh my god, like I didn't see that coming. And that's you kind of need to pick a lane here. You either are willing to just go, you know what, the U.S. is just going to be our main ally, and we're just going to stick with that, or you do think that you need some national redundancy and some national control, and you're willing to pay a price for that.
Yeah.
But trying to kind of have it both ways is a little bit difficult.
No, for sure. My last kind of real point is, I guess implementation is always is always the thing, particularly with governments in this country. So, from your perspective, what signs are you seeing that we're going to be able to implement any of this, or what some of the challenges are? I mean, there's already talking about this, these. New or these defense industrial companies are going to have to deal with multiple ministries and so on, and whether that's the real elimination of bureaucracy or red tape that they're hoping for. So yeah, what are the kind of challenges you're seeing in that area?
Well, in part, I'm wondering, do ministers read their own documents?
Yeah,
or they read their government's own strategy. So you have the industry minister coming out and on TV and being quoted a direct line from the strategy saying that there's going to be multiple ministries still involved. And she says, no, I don't agree with that. That's the purpose of the defense industrial strategy. And there's a, you're
it's
being
right in
quoted
the
a direct
document.
line from the strategy.
Yeah,
And I think this is one of the frustrations that I'm seeing is, yeah, and this happened at the technical briefing that they did for academics as well. They seem to be implying things that are not in the strategy itself.
right.
And you're going, it took you this long to get it out, and you still don't really seem to agree on what it is aiming to do. So the DIA is a good example of this. So we're told it's going to be legislated in the spring. So
Yeah,
that's good news, right?
yeah. That
But
it's going to
then,
be a standalone agency.
yeah, so
Yeah,
it's going to be on its own. They're going to likely amend the Defense Production Act to give it some additional powers or whatever it is. Great, good news. That's what it should have been. It was important to stand it up. It was important to get there. But you read the document, and you can still sense there's a lot of conservatism in this of going, well, I mean, when it comes to certain things, all departments are still going to have to get involved. And there's no hint in the document anyway that Treasury Board is going to be less involved. Maybe it will be. I mean, maybe this is what they're not telling us, right? That they
yeah,
want to see what the legislation is going to look like. But the document still speaks as if the status quo ante is not going to shift that fundamentally. So to your point about implementation, I think this is a document that where the political level, wanted big things. That's the sense I get.
yeah,
But the bureaucrats kind of tried to pull back, probably because they realized just how difficult it is to both do all this and set up a new system at the same time,
yeah,
right? So they're probably saying, look, I mean, there's some things where it's really not that broken, like it's not working as that poorly. So don't mess with that, please. Like just let us do our job, and
yeah,
then you can set up this new system, and gradually we'll get there. But please don't, throw a wrecking ball while we're trying to spend this amount of money. So
yeah,
that's my gut of what's happening. But I also feel that ministers need to be better briefed on their own material here. Like you can't be saying so many different things publicly. Like
yeah.
it's not professional.
All right. Um, well, yeah, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks again for doing this, and we'll
Thanks.
chat again in a few weeks.
Sounds good.
All right. Cheers.
Bye.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter and journodale_no_ on Bluesky. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.